With a sharp slam, 2 blocks of soap are placed on a table, setting a tense atmosphere. A brown-haired girl with purple eyes named Isabella looks shocked as her white-haired father announces that a marriage has been arranged with Duke Cristo. Meanwhile, a girl with long white hair quietly eats a loaf of bread at the same table, seemingly ignored. The fiancé is revealed to be Arnaud Cristo, also known as Duke Cristo, the undefeated hero who led the Izuar Empire to victory many times. However, he vanished 50 years ago after the war, leading to rumors of his death, a fact being discussed at the dinner table. A blonde man explains the marriage proposal comes directly from the royal family, confirmed by their seal, and will secure their territory and bring them a more luxurious life. A dark-haired woman expresses her concern, pointing out that if this is the same Duke, he must be over 70 years old. Horrified, she asks how they can marry their dear Isabella to such an old man. Isabella, with a gentle expression, graciously accepts the marriage proposal, stating it's an honor if it helps their territory. The dark-haired woman calls out Isabella's name in surprise, but the blonde man tells her not to misunderstand. The blonde man declares that a kind daughter like Isabella is not something they would give to an old man, shocking the dark-haired woman. The parents' sinister silhouettes reveal their true plan. They have another daughter, as the white-haired girl continues to eat, unaware. Isabella smirks, realizing her parents' scheme was exactly as she'd anticipated. The dark-haired woman slams the table and furiously yells at the white-haired girl, "Carenzia! Are you listening?" Carenzia looks up from her meal, defiantly asking if that's all they wanted to say to her. The entire family, the blonde man, dark-haired woman, and Isabella stares in shock at Carenzia's bold response. Carenzia internally notes how unusual it was for her family to summon her to the dining room. She reflects on her miserable existence, forced to work from morning until night without rest. She recalls eating moldy bread and thin broth without utensils, concluding that even marrying an old duke is a better fate. Isabella stands up, outraged, demanding to know what Carenzia just said. As Carenzia turns to leave, Isabella grabs her hand, pleading for her to wait. Isabella feigns kindness, telling Carenzia she can always come back and is still her dear sister, despite being adopted. Carenzia questions the term dear, and Isabella agrees, while internally sneering at her poor fun little toy. Behind her facade, Isabella thinks about how much she would have loved to torment Carenzia more. Leaning close, Isabella whispers that it's a shame, her face contorted in a malicious grin as Carenzia glares back. With a swift motion, Carenzia violently slaps Isabella's hand away from her arm. Carenzia stands tall as Isabella falls back into her chair with a frightened "Eek!" The blonde man and dark-haired woman are enraged by Carenzia's actions, accusingly shouting at her. With a vicious smack, the blonde man slaps Carenzia and grabs her hair, yelling at her for daring to touch Isabella. Following the slap, he brutally kicks Carenzia to the floor while the dark-haired woman rushes to comfort Isabella. The blonde man stands menacingly over Carenzia's crumpled form as her adoptive mother and sister watch without pity. Lying bruised on the floor, Carenzia looks up to see Isabella watching her with a cold, triumphant smirk from her chair. As her adoptive family scowls in the background, Carenzia thinks that if this marriage means she can finally leave this house, then she would marry anyone, no matter who they were, her resolve hardening despite the pain. A memory surfaces of her true Marquis family, recalling that by the time she was old enough to understand, their household was already on the brink of ruin. She remembers her mother's grave illness and her father spending all their wealth on medical expenses. Now, in a carriage, Carenzia reflects that her adoptive family only cared about the small Marquis fortune and the government stipend for raising her. She realizes the marriage is just another scheme for them to profit from the dowry and support money. Carenzia remembers how she once thought they were kind, but now sees they only ever viewed her as a toy and a source of money. As the carriage travels on, she wonders why the reclusive Duke suddenly decided he wanted to get married. A smile spreads across her face as she decides the reason doesn't matter. What's important is that she finally escaped that house. She beams with genuine happiness, thinking that a quiet life with an old man doesn't sound so bad after all. A chauffeur in a formal suit opens the door of a car, announcing, "We've arrived." Carenzia steps out and marvels at the magnificent building before her, realizing it must be the Duke's villa. An elderly, white-haired man in a butler's uniform greets her warmly, stating they have been expecting her. Startled, Carenzia looks at the old man and wonders if he could be the Duke she is to marry. The man places a hand over his heart and introduces himself with a polite smile as Rayleigh, the butler. As Rayleigh invites her inside, Corenzia realizes her assumption was wrong. He is merely the butler. She is led into a vast, luxurious room, where the butler invites her to have a seat. After being served tea, Corenzia sits nervously on the sofa and asks Rayleigh where the Duke is. As Rayleigh pours her tea, he explains that the Duke is currently resting and usually only appears during meals. He adds that he is the only servant in the villa and invites Corenzia to make herself comfortable. Corenzia sips her tea, relieved that she will be able to enjoy her new life more freely than she anticipated. Her expression shifts as she realizes that, for the first time in her life, she has nothing to do. Turning to the butler, Corenzia offers her help with any chores. Rayleigh is taken aback by her unexpected offer, letting out a surprised, "Eh?" In the kitchen, Rayleigh politely declines her help, urging her to relax, but she insists. Corenzia explains that she can't relax unless she is doing something productive. As he watches her work with practiced skill, Rayleigh wonders why a noble lady is so experienced with household tasks. She startles him by stopping him from discarding carrot tops, insisting they be used, prompting a flustered apology. While tasting a simmering pot of stew, Corenzia thoughtfully asks about the Duke's food preferences. Rayleigh lists the Duke's favorite dishes: zaffa steak, roasted turkey, and sautéed tallias. Corenzia laughs, delighted to learn that the Duke loves meat and has a very healthy appetite. Rayleigh looks on with a warm, touched expression at her cheerful demeanor. A deep voice from off-screen suddenly complains to Rayleigh that it's too noisy. Corenzia turns in surprise, startled by the unexpected interruption. A handsome, dark-haired man appears, running a hand through his hair and demanding to know who this woman is. Meanwhile, back at her former home, Isabella muses that the useless girl has finally been of some use. She holds a glass of wine, thinking the old Duke should be grateful to marry a young woman before he dies. Her father smirks into his own glass, vowing to get a handsome reward for the arrangement. Isabella joyfully embraces her father, asking for a new dress for an upcoming party. He readily agrees, telling her and her mother that he wants his dear Isabella to marry a young and capable man. Isabella laughs, calling her father a tease before her thoughts turn dark, muttering that Corenzia got what she deserved. Alone, Isabella thinks that Corenzia must resent her own miserable fate. She reveals that from the moment Calandrea came to their house, she despised her. Isabella recalls envying Corenzia's beautiful silver hair, fair skin, and dignified appearance. A flashback shows a young Isabella realizing Corenzia looked exactly like the princess from her favorite picture book. Isabella resented that Corenzia seemed to effortlessly possess everything she herself longed for. Seething with jealousy, she admits that what she couldn't stand most of all were Corenzia's arrogant eyes. She remembers tormenting Corenzia, yet no matter how much she hurt her, Corenzia's bright, clear eyes never lost their light. Isabella stands confidently believing that heaven is ultimately fair. She smirks with satisfaction, convinced a fallen noble like Corenzia could never achieve true happiness. Returning to the present, Corenzia stares at the mysterious dark-haired man, trying to figure out who he is. Her gaze drifts down, and she notices something strange on his stomach. Her eyes fly open in complete and utter shock. The man looks at her with a gentle expression, asking what's wrong. Corenzia worriedly asks him if the object embedded in his stomach doesn't hurt. The dark-haired man looks puzzled, thinking to himself, "Doesn't he notice?" Trembling, Corenzia points at him and stammers that there is something inside his stomach. She has spotted the hilt of a dagger sticking out of his chest, a sight that shocks both the man and Rayleigh. The man's demeanor instantly changes as he grabs her, asking with sudden intensity if she can truly see the dagger. With wide, frantic eyes, he shouts, demanding to know if she can actually see it. Rayleigh rushes to intervene, pleading with Lord Arno to calm down. Stunned, Corenzia processes the name she just heard. Arno? In a flash of realization, she understands that this young, handsome man is Arno Cristo, the Duke. She covers her mouth in disbelief, her mind reeling because she thought the Duke was supposed to be an old man. As the Duke sits down on a sofa, she looks at him and wonders if he could be immortal. He meets her gaze with a knowing smirk and confirms her suspicion is correct. Arno recalls the war 50 years ago, a time of great loss where he wielded a glowing dagger haunted by the memory. In a dark memory, Arno kneels in a pool of his own blood and confesses that he ended his own life. Corenzia processes this revelation, her eyes widening in shock as she realizes he tried to commit suicide. Arno explains that as punishment for his actions, the god of death cursed him. He reveals the nature of the curse, an eternal life, symbolized by a glowing, mechanical heart. Arno looks on with a somber expression, the weight of his immortal life apparent on his face. With deep empathy, Corenzia looks down and thinks how painful his existence must be. She recalls the crushing loneliness she felt after her parents' deaths and realizes the Duke must feel the same, but for all eternity. The moment hangs in the air, reflected in the surface of her teacup. Arno looks directly at Corenzia, a spark of hope in his eyes as he says, "It's you." Confused, she questions him, and he explains that she is the only one who can see the cursed dagger. Understanding dawns on Corenzia as she remembers Rayleigh's shocked reaction and realizes why he was so surprised. Arno looks at her with a pleading gaze and makes his request. He wants her to pull the dagger out. Corenzia is stunned into silence, her mind racing as she wonders what she should do. Wanting to save him, she steels her resolve but hesitates, questioning what will happen if she pulls it out. Arno reveals the grave consequence of her action. If she removes the dagger, he will disappear. Corenzia is horrified, realizing that to save him from his curse, she would have to be the one to end his life. She turns to face both Arno and Rayleigh, a moment of tense silence filling the room. Rayleigh watches her with a look of deep concern, awaiting her decision. Corenzia lifts her head, her expression filled with newfound determination. She gives her answer, declaring that she will help him, but not yet. Her response confuses both Arno and Rayleigh, prompting the Duke to ask what she means. Corenzia silently apologizes, thinking of her past with Isabella and her resolve to never return to that abusive household. She clutches her dress, realizing that if she breaks his curse now, this new life she's just found will vanish. Reaching her hand out to him, she makes a solemn promise to end his life when her own comes to an end. With tears in her eyes, she asks him to stay by her side until then, as her husband. A title card marks a poignant transition in their story. The scene returns to the two of them in the sitting room, her heartfelt request echoing between them. A hint of a smile on his face, Arno leans back on the sofa and agrees to her terms. He stretches out dramatically, eagerly asking how many more years it will be until he can finally die. Arno complains that he has, after all, already been waiting for 50 long years. As he props his feet up on the table, a flustered Corenzia stammers that she can't possibly say how long that will be. Rayleigh sighs in exasperation at his master's childish behavior, muttering, "Duke Arno." A tremor of frustration runs through Corenzia's hand as she clenches her fist. She bows her head, leaving both Arno and Rayleigh to wonder what she will do next. Snapping, Corenzia confronts him, demanding to know why he even wanted to get married if he was so desperate to die. She points out that making his wife a widow on their very first day of marriage is incredibly cruel. A hand reaches out to stop her as a voice calls for her to wait a minute. Arno calmly asks her what she has been going on about. In a moment of comedic confusion, Corenzia glares at Arno while Rayleigh's head is replaced by a giant "Huh?" bubble. Later, at the dining table, Rayleigh asks Arno if the marriage was Prince Ferdinand's proposal. Tisk. Arno clicks his tongue in annoyance, calling the prince a brat for acting without his permission. The story introduces Ferdinand Iswal, the accomplished first prince of the empire and grandson of the previous emperor. A flashback shows Prince Ferdinand and Arno standing back to back, allies with their swords drawn. The narration explains the previous emperor promised the royal family would support Arnaud until his curse was broken. In his final days, the emperor entrusted this duty to a young Ferdinand, asking him to take his place. Arno muses that Ferdinand has always been a slippery prince, while Corenzia wonders why he would arrange this marriage. Rayleigh explains to Arno that he had assumed the Duke was already aware of the prince's plan. Arno reassures his butler that there is no need for him to apologize. He admits that he typically ignores the prince's troublesome letters. He concludes that since he never replied, the prince must have informed Rayleigh directly that a bride had been chosen. A bowl of golden soup is presented, declared to be delicious. Arno agrees with a "wow" as Rayleigh proudly explains that Lady Corenzia made it. At a lavish dinner table, Corenzia sinks to the floor, muttering uncertainly. Alone with her thoughts, Corenzia anxiously wonders what will become of her. Desperate, she decides she'll do anything to stay, even if it means being a servant instead of his wife. Arno watches her from across the table, asking why she is so desperate to stay. With a slight smile, he observes that he hasn't even asked for her name yet. Corenzia looks up in confusion, caught off guard by his question. He rhetorically asks why he would ever let go of the only person capable of breaking his curse. Plus, he adds with a smirk, getting to eat her delicious soup makes marrying her seem not so bad after all. The two men watch as Karenzia prepares to speak, the moment hanging in the air. Extending his hand with a warm smile, Arno formally accepts her proposal. Overjoyed, Karenzia clasps her hands together in relief. With a bright, happy smile, she introduces herself as Karendia. She gives a polite curtsy, asking him to please take care of her. Led into a beautiful room, Karenzia stares in awe, while Arno and Rayleigh look on. Touching a set of wooden doors, she hesitantly asks if it is truly okay for her to use such a lovely room. Rayleigh assures her that of course it is, as the room was prepared especially for Lady Karendia. Touched by the gesture, she quietly asks if it's really for her. Her mind flashes back to a dark, desolate room where she once huddled alone. She remembers the bitter cold of winter, with no bed, forced to sleep on the floor in a filthy blanket. Returning to the present, she realizes with relief that she won't have to live such a miserable life anymore. Arno steps forward, gently asking if she likes her new room. Her bright blue eyes fill with tears of gratitude. Overcome with emotion, she gives him a joyful, tearful smile and thanks him profusely. She turns to Arno to ask a question, and he prompts her to continue. Glancing nervously at the butler, she asks if it's okay to speak while Rayleigh is still there. Taking the hint, Rayleigh politely excuses himself, stating he has some tidying up to do. As he leaves, Rayleigh leans in to whisper a final piece of advice to Duke Arnaud. Be gentle. The door clicks shut, leaving Karenzia and Arno alone in the quiet room. Arno turns to her with a look of concern, asking if he is really that scary. Flustered, Karenzia asks if he came to that conclusion on his own. He leans in, gently asking if there was something on her mind. She clarifies that she's just curious, and asks if it hurts to have a sword sticking out of his stomach. Arno explains that since he's found someone to break the curse, he doesn't need to show the dagger off anymore. With a simple gesture, he makes the dagger disappear, much to Karenzia's astonishment. In its place, he summons a magnificent, glowing blue sword, leaving Karenzia speechless with an amazing. He confirms its power, explaining that he can create blades of wind by slicing the holy sword through the air. As Karenzia walks away, she ponders the meaning of his sweeping ability. Suddenly determined, she spins around and implores the Duke to lend her his power. Her gaze is firm and resolute as she looks up at him. A title card announces the beginning of Chapter 4, The Sleeping Duke's Bride. Outside in a lush garden, Arno holds the glowing sword as Karenzia stands before him. He swings the sword, unleashing a powerful wave of blue energy. The energy blade slices through the air, cutting a clean path through overgrown foliage. Karenzia looks on, marveling at the Duke's incredible technique. She remarks how he finished cutting all the overgrown grass in an instant. Arno looks down at his legendary sword with a bead of sweat, lamenting that he's using its power for yard work. Karenzia explains that she had been looking at the unkempt backyard from her window the day before. In a brief flashback, Rayleigh tells her that the yard used to be a magnificent garden, filled with beautiful roses. Karendia relays a story from Raleigh about how it became difficult to care for the garden, accompanied by a memory of two young boys holding hands. Arno listens with a pensive expression as Karendia falls into a thoughtful silence. With a bright smile, Karendia explains that she simply wanted to bring the neglected garden back to life. As she tends to a weed, Arno stands over her and thoughtfully repeats her words about bringing something back to life. Looking at his own hand, he reflects that he has only ever focused on survival, not truly living. A small smile touches his lips as he muses to himself what a strange and interesting woman she is. Karendia gasps, suddenly noticing the dirt on his clothes and exclaiming his title in alarm. They sit together peacefully on the grass, surrounded by the sunlit garden. She calls his name in surprise as his hand suddenly reaches out and touches her face near her eye. With a gentle expression, Arno surprises her by offering to help out with the work as well. Having finished their work, they walk side by side down the mansion's long sunlit hallway. Arno admits he's tired from the physical work, but a cheerful Karendia asks if he doesn't feel refreshed. She looks at him expectantly for an answer, and he can only offer a hesitant, well, in response. Looking utterly exhausted, Arno declares the day's work over and says he needs a shower. Their walk is interrupted when Karendia spots Rayleigh carrying a large wooden box down the hall. Rayleigh turns to greet her with a warm smile, addressing her as Lady Kalendia. She quickly offers to help him with the heavy-looking box, but he insists that there's no need to worry. He explains that he'd wanted to make her a cake, but couldn't seem to find the recipe among the old things. At the mere mention of cake, a chibi Calendia with fox ears lights up with pure excitement. Blushing with joy, Calendia wonders how many years it's been since she had anything sweet. Peeking into a cluttered storage room, Calendia watches as Rayleigh laments how embarrassing the mess is. Calendia cheerfully offers to help find the recipe, while Arno watches her from behind. Rayleigh protests that she's already done enough by tending the garden, but she cheerfully insists it's fine. She beams, declaring that if the three of them search together, finding the recipe will be a piece of cake. Turning to the Duke for backup, she asks for his agreement, putting him on the spot. The search begins as a hand is placed on a stack of old papers on the floor. Kneeling down to help, Arno internally groans that his plans for a bath and a nap have been ruined. Calendia whispers playfully to Arno that helping is fun, reminding him that Rayleigh is an old grandpa. She dramatically worries about Rayleigh hurting his back, earning a shocked expression from the butler who overhears her. While flipping through a book, Arno quietly reveals a startling fact. He's actually older than Rayleigh. Calendia discovers a large, ornate book amidst the clutter and curiously asks what it is. Arno explains that it's an album, and a curious chibi Calendia asks for permission to look inside. She opens the heavy book, revealing pages filled with old photographs and handwritten notes. One photo shows a younger, serious-looking Arno standing next to a kind, smiling man in a suit. A closer look at the photo highlights the warm smile of the man standing beside the young Duke. Mistaking the man for the butler, Calendia comments on how cool Rayleigh has always been. Arno scoffs that she has no eye for men, proudly declaring he's far more handsome and leaving Rayleigh looking offended. Calendia simply murmurs, "Ah," her attention already captured by another page in the album. She points to another photo, this one of Arno, and remarks on how gentle he looks when he's smiling. The album page is filled with elegant, handwritten script detailing memories of the past. The photograph captures a younger Arno smiling softly as he gently holds a single red rose. Noticing his pensive silence while looking at the photo, Calendia quietly asks if he is all right. Rayleigh quickly steps in and dismisses the moment, claiming it's nothing important. The butler gives the Duke a knowing and somber look, understanding the memories the photo holds. A few days later, Arno is enjoying a slice of cake when he's told of a visitor, wondering who it could be. As Arno and Calendia sit at the dining table, Rayleigh confirms that a visitor has indeed arrived. Uninterested, Arno takes a bite of food and tells them to just ignore the inconsiderate guest. Suddenly, Prince Ferdinand bursts into the room, dramatically shouting that something terrible has occurred. Arno glares at the prince, letting out an exasperated sigh as he says Ferdinand's name. Calendia is startled as a cheerful, blonde-haired young man appears, announced as the Crown Prince. Blushing, Calendia greets the prince, noting it's their first time meeting. The prince, Ferdinand, waves off formalities and pats a grumpy-looking Arno on the head, telling him to sit. Calendia looks at the prince, silently processing his sudden appearance. Across the table, Arno bluntly asks Prince Ferdinand why he is there. Ferdinand wraps an arm around Arno, complaining that he's cold, and explaining he came to celebrate his new marriage partner. With a bright smile, the prince congratulates a stone-faced Arno. As a slice of cake is shown, Arno states that the prince kept sending out marriage proposals on his own. Prince Ferdinand explains that he just thought it would be better for Arno to enjoy his life. The prince turns to Calendia, confirming what Rayleigh told him. She can see the sword stuck in Arnaud. Speaking to Rayleigh and Calendia, Ferdinand smugly declares that everything turned out fine in the end. With a confident wink, he suggests that he deserves a little more praise for his matchmaking. He cheerfully calls over to Rayleigh, asking for cake and tea. As Ferdinand sips his tea, Calendia watches him with a surprised expression. Observing the group at the table, Calendia thinks to herself that the prince is a surprisingly friendly person. Taking a sip from his own cup, Arno replies that he's just being casual. The prince's expression turns serious as he remembers something. Smiling, he announces that he almost forgot something important. He presents a wax-sealed letter mentioning his grandfather, the previous emperor's, birthday celebration. A panel shows both Arno and Calendia, the intended recipients of the invitation. The prince formally extends the invitation, saying they'd love for both Arno and his partner to attend. Presenting the letter at the table, Ferdinand reiterates the invitation to a wide-eyed Calendia. Corendia thoughtfully recalls how her adoptive family used to travel to the imperial capital every year for the event. In a somber flashback, a younger Corendia watches them leave from behind a window pane. The prince explains that an envoy usually delivers the invitation, but he decided to bring it himself. Corendia realizes the prince must be very determined for them to attend this year. She glances at the Duke, anxiously wondering how he will respond. Ferdinand points out that Arno declines with an excuse every year, but this time it includes a marriage announcement. Arno looks at the prince and gives a one-word answer. I refuse. Bam! The prince slams his hands on the table, demanding to know why, as a startled Corendia looks on. Arno casually holds his fork, explaining that going is just bothersome. Grabbing his friend's shoulder, Ferdinand pleads with Arno not to dismiss the invitation so easily. With tears in his eyes, he explains that his grandfather warned him that if he failed to get a promise of attendance, he should consider himself a dead man. Arno sighs, finding it hard to believe that the famously strong emperor would die so easily. Desperate, the prince turns his tearful gaze toward Corendia, calling her name. He implores her to do something about the Duke's refusal to enter the castle. With a nervous smile, Corendia thinks that she's hardly the Duke's guardian. She calmly asks the prince how long it has been since he last met the Duke, considering he declines the invitation every year. Arno looks away sharply, stating that he doesn't remember. The prince points an accusing finger at Arno, complaining to Corendia about how bad his behavior is. Corendia lets out a weary sigh, having had enough of the prince's whining. The prince claps his hands together decisively, announcing that he understands. Suddenly, several servants walk past the dining table, carrying luggage and chests into the manor. Arno looks over at the commotion and asks what all the luggage is for. The prince reminds him of the threat from his grandfather, stating he'll be killed if he returns empty-handed. Looking resolute, he declares that he won't return to the imperial palace until Arno agrees to attend the celebration. He flashes a smug, determined grin, ready to wait as long as it takes. Now sitting in an outdoor gazebo, the prince sips his tea and remarks on what a peaceful life Arno leads. He continues his monologue, appreciating the lush green nature all around them. He muses on the sound of chirping birds and the leisure of sipping tea brewed by Rayleigh. The scene opens on a delicate floral teacup. Prince Ferdinand sighs in contentment, thinking what a blissful moment it is. Holding a white lily, he turns to Arno, asking if he agrees. Arno coldly replies that it would be if Ferdinand weren't there, much to the prince's dismay. Exhausted, Arno says he wants to sleep, while Ferdinand also looks tired from the exchange. Ferdinand sighs in exasperation, complaining about how difficult recluses are. Yikes. He flinches as the sound of a sword being drawn rings out. With a sword to his throat, Arno menacingly asks if he said something, but Ferdinand quickly denies it. As the prince laughs it off, Arno internally remarks on how lighthearted Ferdinand has always been. Arno wonders if they're even friends, musing on the former emperor's outrageous grandchild. Spotting Corendia in the garden, Ferdinand cheerfully waves and invites her to take a break. Surrounded by potted roses, Corendia smiles and thanks him for the offer. She politely declines for now, saying she'll rest after moving all the seedlings. From her perspective, she asks the two men what they are doing. Arno watches her with a slight smile, explaining to Ferdinand that she intends to revive the neglected backyard. Ferdinand points out she could just hire a gardener, but Arno counters that she wants to do it herself. The prince watches her thoughtfully as she works in the distance. He admits to being a bit surprised, and a tiny Arno asks him what about. Ferdinand recalls hearing Corendia's adoptive father, Count Guise, claim at a party that she was too weak and frail to ever go outside. Arno scoffs at the memory, questioning what part of her seems weak. As he watches her, he thinks to himself that she is both independent and strong. He suggests to Ferdinand that the Count must have simply been mistaken. Ferdinand disagrees, stating the Count never changed his story, which is why he thought a quiet life in the mountains would suit her. Arno listens to the prince's explanation in silence. He looks down thoughtfully, admitting that in hindsight, a few things about her situation are concerning. He recalls how she, a count's daughter, arrived alone without servants and is skilled at cooking and housework. A memory of her desperate plea to stay flashes through his mind. Hiding his face, he listens as Ferdinand observes how desperate she looked at that time. The prince playfully teases him, asking if he's starting to get concerned about Lady Corendia. Leaning back with a relaxed air, Arno coolly denies having any particular feelings. Ferdinand leans in closer, asking if Arno has become emotionally dead. Arno states that there's no reason to expect special feelings to develop between them in the future. Ferdinand looks unconvinced, asking how he can be so confident. Arno leans back, remembering Corindia telling him that she doesn't seek love from him. He smiles, recalling how she insisted she had no interest in him at all. While Ferdinand finds the situation sad, a chibi Arno thinks it's actually quite nice and relaxing. Staring into his tea, Arno confirms that he feels the same way. His agreement leaves Ferdinand looking at him with a puzzled expression. A dark vision flashes, a dagger held high as Corindia stands over his body, with Arno thinking that being killed by her would be an acceptable end. Returning to the present, he sips his tea and concludes that he doesn't need anything else. Cue! The scene shifts to a bloody battlefield where a wounded, silver-haired soldier collapses, coughing up blood. With fiery determination in his eyes, the soldier glares ahead, vowing, "Just wait." Lying among the dead and the flames, he weakly promises that he'll be there soon. His blood-stained hand reaches out toward an unseen goal. A sinister, red-haired man looms over him, grabbing his throat and mocking him as a pathetic hero. The silver-haired soldier kneels in defeat before a cloaked figure. Looking up at his adversary, the dying soldier asks who he is. The red-haired man, dressed in a military uniform, introduces himself as the Grim Reaper, annoyed that someone is dying without his permission. As a title card appears, the silver-haired soldier lets out a final groan. The Grim Reaper looks down at him, stating that he isn't on the list of people scheduled to die today. The red-haired Grim Reaper warns the dying soldier that if he dies, the precious lives he was supposed to save in the future will also be sacrificed. Standing over the fallen man, the Grim Reaper asks him if he understands what was just said. Lying in a pool of his own blood, the soldier despairs that he couldn't even save the one life he wanted to most. With a bloody and defeated expression, he declares that he has no meaning in living. Gah! The Grim Reaper recoils in frustration before stalking toward the dying soldier. He looks down at the soldier, calling him a complete fool. The Grim Reaper lectures the fallen soldier, telling him he committed a grave sin by trying to abandon his powerful life over a fleeting feeling. With a flash of red light, chains materialize and wrap around the soldier's heart. "Kirk!" The soldier cries out in agony as the curse takes hold. Surrounded by the magical chains, the Grim Reaper grimly explains that this is a curse. Clutching a glowing dagger now embedded in his chest, the soldier learns he cannot die by his own will, nor can he ask another to kill him. As the soldier struggles fruitlessly to remove the dagger, the Grim Reaper explains the only way to break the curse is to pull it out. Now with dark hair, Arno screams in desperation, asking what he's supposed to do. A hand appears, gently patting the Grim Reaper on the head. The Grim Reaper turns and walks away, telling Arno that if he truly wants to die, he must find someone. Clutching the cursed dagger, Arno learns he must find the one and only person who can see it. The scene transitions to a peaceful, sunny town square in the present day. A hooded Arno bumps into an older man, who apologizes before Arno insists it was his own fault for being distracted. The older man gets a glimpse of Arno's face under the hood and wonders aloud if he could be Duke Christo. A second man with blonde hair rushes over, scolding the first for speaking such nonsense. An older couple, the man and a woman, quickly apologize for the disturbance. The woman chides the man for thinking a young person could be the Duke, but he explains he was just surprised by the strong resemblance. As they walk away, the couple muses that if the Duke were still alive, he'd probably be their age. Overhearing their conversation, Arno thinks about their words regarding his monster-like strength. He walks away from the couple, quietly reflecting on being called a monster. He accepts that for someone immortal and ageless, being called a monster is perhaps inevitable. He sighs to himself, feeling utterly tired of his long existence. Holding a single white rose, he despairs that he can't find the person the Grim Reaper mentioned, and doesn't even know if they truly exist. Having lost all hope, he decides to hole himself up and live as if he's dead, seeing no more meaning in his life. The memory fades to him lying in bed, lost in his solitude and despair. His lonely morning is interrupted as Corindia peeks into his room with a bright smile, wishing the Duke a good morning. Back in the present, Prince Ferdinand happily declares that all the dishes Corindia made are delicious. Watching the cheerful prince eat, Corindia thinks to herself that he fits in surprisingly well. The four of them, Arno, Corindia, Ferdinand, and Rayleigh, sit together at the dining table. Corindia glances at Arno, privately worrying that the prince's stay which has now been a week, is interfering with the Duke's work. Arno silently watches Ferdinand enjoying his meal. A thought bubble explains that despite his carefree appearance, Ferdinand is actually quite thorough when it comes to his duties. As Ferdinand is shown handing off official documents, Carendia suggests to Arno that they should just leave the prince be, predicting he'll give up and go home soon. Carendia notices Arno's thoughtful expression and asks if something is bothering him. He thinks to himself that the prince's personal belongings are increasing by the day, and at this rate, he's planning to move in with them. A sudden, horrifying realization makes Arno gasp. What? Prince Ferdinand looks up from his food, confused by Arno's outburst. Carendia gently reminds Arno about the Emperor's birthday invitation, asking if it's time to send a reply. Arno turns to Carendia, his expression unreadable, as he stays silent. He knows that even if he responds, Ferdinand won't return to the castle until he agrees to attend the celebration. He imagines attending the event as a couple, their hands shown together wearing matching wedding rings. In his mind, he sees Carendia being surrounded by prying eyes as people label her the monster's bride. He concludes that she is still too young and isn't strong enough to endure such cruel scrutiny. Sitting at the table, Arno reaffirms his decision, thinking that, as expected, this is why he can't go. Looking over his shoulder, Ferdinand questions Arno with a curious, Arno calmly announces his decision regarding the Emperor's birthday celebration. He will be the only one attending. Both Ferdinand and Carendia react with shock to his statement, as the prince says, "Wait." Ferdinand gestures emphatically, protesting Arno's decision, and asking what will happen to Carendia. Standing up from the table, Carendia reassures everyone that she will be fine. With her face hidden by her hair, she quietly admits that she is used to this kind of situation. She forces a bright, sad smile, clarifying that she is used to being left behind. Rayleigh looks on with concern as Carendia excuses herself from the table. With a quiet sound, Carendia turns and walks away from the awkward breakfast. As Arno continues to eat, Ferdinand glares at him with utter disapproval. Rayleigh joins Ferdinand in staring down Arno, who remains oblivious at the table. Ferdinand sighs in exasperation, telling Arno his words were uncalled for as Carendia walks alone down the hall. The scene shifts to a sunny garden, where Carendia sits alone on a bench beneath a leafy archway. She sits quietly on the bench, looking down with a forlorn expression. She reflects that, from the very beginning, she had always intended to follow the Duke's decision. Recalling her past, she thinks about their contract marriage and how, like her time with the Count's family, she remains hidden from the public eye. Clutching her hands to her chest with closed eyes, she wonders about the strange, new feeling rising within her. Growl. Her somber moment is comically interrupted by the loud rumbling of her empty stomach. A sudden chirping sound catches her attention, and she wonders if there are animals nearby. Looking up into the trees, she tries to locate the source of the sound somewhere above. Back at the table, Ferdinand angrily points out how awful it was for Arno to announce he was going alone right in front of his wife. He tells Rayleigh that Carendia's forced smile made his heart ache, and he worries that she is probably crying right now. A chibi Ferdinand laments how pitiful her situation is, while a chibi Rayleigh dabs his eyes with a handkerchief. Standing with his arms crossed, Ferdinand glares at the Duke and declares, "Arnaud, you're the worst." Arno lets out a weary sigh, finally relenting and agreeing to go apologize. As Arno gets up to leave, Ferdinand sternly instructs him to apologize sincerely and not to glare at her. Walking away, Arno grumbles to himself, wondering if he's being treated like a child. He pauses before a door, admitting to himself that his words were probably lacking. He quietly wonders what else he could have possibly said in that situation. Clenching his fist, he acknowledges that having avoided others for so long, he no longer knows how to express himself properly. He opens the door to an empty room, realizing that she is not there. Looking out the window, he wonders where she could have gone, only to spot her high up in a tree. He finds Carendia stretched precariously across a thick tree branch, reaching for something just out of her grasp. She struggles, thinking she's almost there, as a small, white, ferret-like animal watches from a lower branch. The tiny animal lets out a cry as her fingers inch closer. Arno suddenly appears below and asks what she is doing, startling her so much that she calls out his name in surprise. The two lock eyes, both surprised by the unexpected encounter in the garden. Hop! The small animal and a companion leap onto her head, startling her further. Ah! With a small cry, Carendia loses her balance and falls backward out of the tree. Arno moves in a flash, catching her securely in his arms and asking if she is okay. Looking up at him from his arms, She dazedly thanks him for the rescue. A tiny, trembling Corendia exclaims how scared she was by the fall. Holding her, Arno notices her body feels as light as a feather and questions if her weight is normal. As he carries her through the garden, she nervously asks to be put down, and he apologizes. The small, ferret-like creature peeks out curiously from behind the tree trunk. He gently sets her on her feet, and they stand facing each other in an awkward silence. Arno struggles to find the right words for an apology, his thoughts drifting to how awkward this is and the fact that he's still hungry. Corendia looks down, privately wondering if she could ask Rayleigh to get her some fruit. Arno observes her stern expression, concluding that she isn't crying but might be angry with him. Corendia's face flushes as she desperately hopes her stomach doesn't growl again in front of the Duke. A flustered Corendia thinks to herself that she should get away from this awkward situation soon. She turns back to Arno, thanking him for his help and politely trying to excuse herself. Looking panicked, Arno calls out, asking her to wait for just a moment. Corendia looks back in surprise and asks what he wants, but he just stammers, "Well," a memory of Ferdinand's scolding flashes in his mind, demanding he apologize properly, as a tiny Corendia looks on with concern. Clenching his fist, Arno finally manages to force out an apology for his earlier behavior. They stand in awkward silence in the garden, with the ferret-like creature peeking out from behind the tree. Completely bewildered, Corendia wonders why the Duke is apologizing, and guesses it must be about the birthday festival. Arno explains that while the decision was his to make, he recognizes he has no reason to apologize, further confusing the situation. Still trying to understand, Corendia wonders if he's sorry for startling her and causing her to fall. Her guess seems to be wrong, as Arno reacts with a shocked, "Huh?" Corendia gives a polite curtsy, tells him not to worry, and turns to leave as Arno realizes his apology has failed. A chibi Arno panics, convinced that his awkward attempt has only made her angrier. Corendia walks away cheerfully, relieved that her stomach didn't growl, leaving a dismayed Arno behind. As Corendia gets some bread from Rayleigh in the kitchen, Arno secretly peeks around the corner, watching them. She beams happily at the bowl of fruit from Rayleigh, and Arno notes how different her bright attitude is compared to how she acts around him. Over the next 2 days, Arno continues to watch Corendia from afar, while mealtimes become a silent, grumpy standoff. 3 days later, while Corendia is sweeping outside, she gets the unsettling feeling she's being watched, unaware of Arno hiding behind a tree. Arno nervously peeks out from behind the tree as Corendia continues her work. He laments to himself that with each passing day, it becomes more difficult to approach her. Corendia finally notices him lurking and resolves that she can't let this awkwardness continue. Mustering his courage, Arno approaches and apologizes for interrupting her cleaning, reaching out a hand. Startled by his sudden approach, she instinctively flinches away from his hand. In a moment of pure shock, Arno realizes she actively avoided his touch. Panicked, Corendia apologizes and quickly makes an excuse about needing to bring in laundry before it rains, then rushes off. Rain begins to fall against a window, a single red rose resting on the sill. A lone figure lies huddled under the covers of a bed, hidden from the world. Ferdinand and Rayleigh peek into the room, with the prince noting Arno has failed completely and the butler asking what their next move is. Standing determinedly in the hall, Ferdinand declares that they have no choice but to intervene. He winks confidently, announcing that they'll have to help the two of them out themselves. In his room, Arno remains hidden under the blankets as the rain continues outside. He sits up, still wrapped in his blanket, wondering why he's letting a young woman run circles around him. Huddled back under the covers like a ghost, he wonders what he's supposed to do now. Suddenly, Ferdinand bursts into the room, shouting Arno's name. Arno looks on in alarm as he sees Rayleigh collapsed on the floor, being tended to by a worried Corendia and Ferdinand. Rushing over, Arno asks what's wrong. Corendia explains that Rayleigh hurt his back while he was cleaning the windows. Ferdinand turns to Arno, urgently trying to get his attention to explain the plan. Ferdinand reports that Lady Calindia intends to go to town for medicine. His internal thoughts reveal his concern that it's too dangerous for her to go down the mountain alone. Corendia adds that there are wild animals, and even if she arrives safely, she's worried about other dangers. Ferdinand asks Arno to escort her, pointing out that they both don't know the way and she could easily get lost. With his arms crossed, Arno listens as Ferdinand and Corendia look to him for an answer. Corendia tries to refuse the help, insisting she can handle the trip by herself. Ferdinand immediately shoots down her protest with a loud, "No way!" Ferdinand thinks to himself that This is Arno's only chance to make up with her. Grabbing Arno's arm, Ferdinand begs him to go, much to Corindia's surprise. Arno silently observes Ferdinand's desperate plea, seemingly making his decision. Now on horseback, Arno wraps a cloak around himself and Corindia as they ride off, waved on by Ferdinand and Rayleigh. As Ferdinand and Rayleigh wave them off, the ferret-like animal on the prince's shoulder, they wish the pair a safe trip. Riding together on horseback, Corindia leans against Arno with a blissful smile. They gallop swiftly down a path through a sunlit forest. Corindia's expression turns to worry as she wonders if it was truly okay for him to come with her. As Arno looks over at her, Corindia keeps her gaze down, an awkward silence stretching between them. Breaking the silence, Arno asks if she is sure that he is the right person to be her escort. He asks if she is angry with him, to which she responds with a confused, "Huh?" Turning back to him, a surprised Corindia asks what he is talking about. Arno reminds her of how she coldly dismissed his apology, insisting that, quote, the Duke has done nothing wrong. Corindia denies pushing him away, explaining that she was simply stating a fact. "See?" Arno exclaims. Convinced her defensive tone proves that she is obviously angry with him. Corindia asks why she would be angry, clarifying that her fall from the tree was due to her own carelessness. Both Arno and Corindia are left completely bewildered by the misunderstanding. Arno clarifies, asking if she wasn't angry because he had planned to attend the celebration alone. Blushing with embarrassment, Corindia admits that at the time, she was just hungry. Shocked, Arno listens as she adds that she simply wanted to get back inside as quickly as possible. With a shy smile, Corindia thinks to herself that she didn't really want to admit the embarrassing reason. She touches her cheek, flustered by her own honest confession. A soft smile crosses Arno's face as he finally understands that she wasn't angry after all. He breathes a silent sigh of relief, thankful for the cleared air between them. The horses' hooves pound against the dirt path as they continue their journey. As they emerge from the trees, Arno points ahead, announcing they've reached the town at the foot of the mountain. The scene shifts to Count Guise's estate, where he laments that the money from the Duke has run out. The Countess expresses her shock at the news, but the Count angrily silences her. He furiously accuses her of wasting their money on useless jewels and antiques. The Countess begins to retort, but stops as Isabella appears in the doorway. Isabella watches her parents with a sad expression, thinking they are always fighting. She bites her lip in frustration, thinking that, even with Corindia gone, the atmosphere is more uncomfortable than ever. Her sadness turns to fierce determination, her purple eyes filled with resolve. Isabella calls out to a startled maid, who nervously answers. With a demanding look, Isabella orders the maid to prepare the carriage immediately. Returning to the present, Corindia looks excitedly at the town entrance, thinking she has waited so long for this. As Arno tends to the horse, she wonders aloud how many years it has been since she last walked through a town. Arno turns back to her, apologizing for the wait. He offers her his hand to help her down from the horse, but she hesitates, questioning his gesture. He explains that it would be better for her to have some support. Corindia contemplates his outstretched hand with a serious expression. As she places her hand in his, she notes how large it feels. A painful memory surfaces of being punished by the Count for merely approaching the mansion gates and being beaten in a dark room. She recalls being locked in that same room for 3 days straight, left completely alone. But now, her thoughts trail off as she securely holds onto Arno's hand. Looking up at him with a newfound trust, she decides it is okay to accept his help. Arno pulls up his hood to conceal his face and asks if she is ready to go. Corindia reflects on how Arno always accepts her wishes and apologizes sincerely when he is wrong. She contrasts his kindness with the coldness of her abusive, adoptive family. Recalling her sadness when she thought he was shutting her out, Arno notices her change in mood and asks what's wrong. Corindia quickly laughs it off, assuring him that it is nothing. She decides to pretend she didn't notice the strange feeling, reminding herself that they are only bound by a contract as they walk into town. Corindia gasps in awe as she and the hooded Arno take their first steps into the bustling town. From above, the two are seen walking down a stone street lined with timber-framed buildings. Looking at the charming architecture, she marvels at what a wide and lovely town it is. Corindia looks at a fruit stand in the bustling market, thinking how lively the town is. Arno, his hood partially down, cautions her not to look around so much, or she might attract suspicion. Looking at his shrouded figure, Corindia thinks to herself, that the Duke is the one who looks far more suspicious. As they walk down the street, she notices that the wind is starting to pick up. Corendia stops in her tracks, her attention caught by a large, golden statue in the town square. Her eyes light up as she realizes with certainty that it's a statue of the Duke. Turning to Arno with an amazed smile, she asks if there are more statues like it in other towns. Arno quietly observes the statue of himself, a thoughtful expression on his face. A sudden gust of wind whips leaves through the air, and Corendia cries out as something flies into her face while Arno shields himself with a quiet shh. He rushes to her side, asking if she's all right as she clutches her face, complaining about sand in her eyes. As Arno tends to her, a nearby townsman points them out, remarking to his friend how much Arno looks like the hero from the statue. His friend scoffs that he must be imagining things, but the first man insists on the resemblance, only to be reminded that the statue was built 50 years ago. The man wonders aloud if the Duke is some kind of monster who doesn't age, a comment Arno overhears with a grim expression. He listens as whispers of him being a monster spread, clenching his fist and telling himself there's no need to be surprised. He braces himself, thinking that he had prepared for this kind of reaction. Believing the situation is within his expectations, his thoughts are cut short when someone shouts, "Hey, you two over there." Corendia steps forward, her face a mask of fury as she demands the men take back what they just said. She stands her ground before the two surprised townsmen, repeating her command. The two men look down at her, completely bewildered by her sudden outburst. One of the men dismissively tells her to stay out of it, calling her an outsider. Corendia acknowledges she's an outsider, but the insult triggers painful memories of being abused by her adoptive family. Her thoughts darken as she insists that she knows what a true monster really is. With fierce determination, she resolves that she won't let them compare the kind Duke to those cruel people. She raises her voice, declaring to the men that the Duke is not a monster. Passionately, she defends him, shouting that he is a kind person. The confrontation unfolds in the middle of the town square, drawing attention. Watching the scene escalate, Arno pulls his hood tighter, realizing the situation will be bad if it gets out of hand. He steps between them, his expression tense as he tries to de-escalate, telling them not to fight over something trivial. Corendia turns to him, shocked and hurt by his words, questioning how he could call their insults trivial. She passionately argues that these people insulted him without knowing his suffering, and she will never forgive them. The commotion attracts two town guards, who run toward the group, shouting for them to stop. Realizing they've drawn the authorities, Arno grabs Corendia's arm, urgently telling her they need to leave. As he pulls her away, she protests, insisting that the men still haven't apologized. She continues to demand an apology, pointing back at the men and guards as Arno drags her from the square. The guards, seeing their targets have fled, decide to split up and search the area. MMPH. Arno pulls Corendia into a nearby alley, silencing her with his hand as the guards run past, and quietly asks if they're gone. Once the coast is clear, Corendia fumes with anger, vowing that she will never forgive those men and will make them regret it. To her surprise, Arno lets out a sudden laugh. She demands to know why he's laughing, but he just smiles, unable to contain his amusement. Wiping a tear from his eye, he explains that he's never heard of a protection target being the one to start a fight with the townsfolk. A flustered chibi Corendia reacts as he teases her for her unheard-of behavior. Looking down with embarrassment, Corendia thinks to herself that he's right, and that it's hard to tell who's protecting who. Arno looks at the dejected Corendia with a gentle, knowing smile. He reaches out and softly pats her on the head. With a rare, warm smile, he admits to her that her actions made him feel happy. Stunned, Corendia asks if he really just said he was happy, but a flustered Arno quickly changes the subject, suggesting they get something to eat. She watches him walk away, wondering if she just imagined his heartfelt confession. Trying to act casual, Arno asks her if there are any foods she doesn't like. Corendia shyly replies that there is nothing in particular she dislikes. Arno grins, remarking that he thought so, since she eats anything and everything back at the mansion. HMPH. Corendia fumes silently behind Arno, thinking he's making her sound like a glutton. Noticing she's fallen behind, Arno calls back to her, and she quickly scurries to catch up. As they walk together, Corendia's eyes widen with concern as she spots two guards patrolling the street ahead. She quietly asks Arno if it is really okay for them to make a stop, knowing that Rayleigh is waiting for them back at the mansion. He reassures her that it is fine if it's just for a little while. He then adds that he was just going along with whatever Prince Ferdinand had planned for him anyway. Feeling relieved, Corendia thinks to herself that if the Duke says it's okay, then it must be. The two enjoy their time in town, sipping drinks from cups and looking at bread grilling at a food stall. Corendia looks delighted, holding a large sandwich, while a cute chibi version of her gets a crumb wiped from her cheek by a smiling Arno. A bright, happy smile lights up Corendia's face as she savors the moment. Arno watches her with a warm and gentle expression. Holding a paper bag from a pharmacy, a smiling Corendia says she hopes this will help with Rayleigh's back pain. She suddenly stops, her attention completely captured by an ornate dress sparkling in a shop window. She recognizes the shop, Perlie, as the one her adoptive sister Isabella had always admired for its dresses. Admiring the elegant, ruffled white gown, she murmurs to herself how beautiful it is. Arno stands beside her, quietly observing her captivated expression as she stares at the dress. Shaking her head frantically, a flustered Corendia insists that her staring at the dress is not the reason they stopped. Arno simply looks at her and starts to say something else, beginning with, "Besides." Corendia looks down sadly, admitting that she has no place to wear such a lovely dress anyway. Arno listens, his expression turning serious as he watches her. She suddenly turns to him, her voice filled with passion, as she asks if he isn't frustrated by his situation. Arno reflects on the past, remembering how someone had once chided Corendia, and how he had worried she wouldn't be able to endure the judgmental stares at a birth celebration. A small smile appears on his face as he concludes that his worries about her were completely unfounded. Seeing his sudden smile, a confused Corendia can only respond with, "Huh?" A tiny, chibi Corendia looks up at him with a large question mark floating above her head. He imagines the two of them dancing elegantly, confident that she can stand tall no matter what happens. Turning to her and gently taking her hand, he formally asks if she will attend the birth celebration with him. He repeats the question, looking at her expectantly as they stand before the beautiful dress in the window. Utterly shocked and surrounded by question marks, Corendia is at a loss for words. Confused, she reminds him that he had previously told her he would be going to the event alone. He looks at her calmly and simply states that he has changed his mind. A panicked chibi Corendia doesn't understand the sudden change, frantically wondering what is going on. Kneeling before her like a true gentleman, Arno holds her hand and asks for her answer. Flustered, Corendia thinks to herself that she doesn't really understand what's happening. Her thoughts continue as she processes the fact that the Duke himself is inviting her so sincerely. She hesitantly reaches her hand toward his, saying she will go if he thinks she's suitable. Her happy moment is cut short as she remembers a critical detail. She doesn't have a dress to wear. Arno gestures toward the mannequin in the window, declaring that the dress on display should do just fine. Corendia throws her hands up in protest, exclaiming that she can't possibly let him buy her something so expensive. He casually grabs the back of her hood, telling her not to underestimate his financial power as he starts walking toward the shop. As he pulls her along, a stunned Corendia can only shout, "What?" They step into the elegant boutique, where a brown-haired shopkeeper in a green dress greets them. Corendia covers her mouth, her eyes wide with awe as she takes in the beautiful interior. The shopkeeper offers them a formal welcome. With a bright, professional smile, the shopkeeper asks how she can assist them. Arno gestures toward the window, simply asking for the dress displayed there. He then presents a heavy pouch overflowing with gold coins. He tells the shocked shopkeeper to get the dress for Corendia, along with the finest shoes and accessories to match. The shopkeeper bows deeply, immediately understanding and accepting his request. Arno tells Corendia that he'll wait outside and to call him when she's finished trying everything on. Waiting outside, Arno reflects that it feels like ages since he last went shopping. He looks out over the town, marveling at how much the city has changed over the years. Standing before the Pearly Boutique, he recalls that no shops this fancy existed back when his statue was erected. Deciding to leave the fashion choices to the staff, he turns and accidentally bumps into a young woman in a purple dress, who lets out a startled, "Kia!" The woman, revealed to be Isabella, angrily demands he watch where he is going. Arno extends a hand and asks if she's hurt, causing a flustered and blushing Isabella to stammer that she is fine. Captivated by his handsome features, Isabella thinks to herself what a noble face he has. Just then, the shopkeeper welcomes them, and Arno gestures for Isabella to enter the shop. Before she can, another young woman rushes toward her, calling out, "Lady Isabella!" Isabella snaps at her companion, irritatedly telling her not to get in the way. Her companion warns her that Lord Hina will be furious if he finds out they left without permission. Ignoring the warning, Isabella stares at the boutique's door, convinced she has just found her destined one. She weighs her options, worrying that upsetting her father might get her barred from an upcoming birthday celebration. Reluctantly, she agrees to leave for now, much to her companion's relief. As they walk away, Isabella schemes, hoping to meet the mysterious man at the celebration, thinking his purchase might not be for a partner, after all. A confident smile spreads across her face as she thinks about how she can't wait for the event. Inside the shop, Arno walks upstairs and wonders to himself if the flashy woman he just met was a noble's daughter. The shopkeeper leads him to a fitting room, gesturing for him to enter. He steps inside to see Carendia, now transformed, standing before him in the beautiful white gown. Carendia nervously smooths her new dress and asks him how it looks. Seeing his silence, her confidence wavers as she worries that the expensive dress doesn't suit her at all. She looks at his shadowed form with concern, calling out to the Duke. He turns and walks away, simply stating that it's fine. Phew! Carendia lets out a sigh of relief, thankful he approves. The shopkeeper happily tells her they will prepare the dress, and Carendia joyfully agrees. Arno reminds her they need to head back to the estate soon, as it will be dark before they know it. Peeking out of the fitting room, Carendia enthusiastically agrees. A moment later, a chibi Carendia panics, realizing she needs to hurry up and change out of the dress. Thump! Outside the room, Arno slides down the wall, completely flustered and blushing intensely. Carendia stands elegantly in the dress, unaware of the effect she's had. A close-up reveals Arno's flushed cheeks and sparkling, overwhelmed eyes. He clutches his cloak, completely overwhelmed by his feelings, and wondering what is happening to him. A few days later, at the mansion, Carendia sips tea, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. She sits in the parlor with a brooding Arno and a cheerful Prince Ferdinand. She thinks about how she only went to town for Rayleigh's medicine, but ended up with a new dress. Feeling a bit guilty, Prince Ferdinand laughs warmly, telling her not to worry about it. The chibi Arno glares at the prince, thinking he's not one to talk. Arno informs Ferdinand that he will now attend the former emperor's birthday celebration with Carendia as his partner, as requested. As Ferdinand nibbles on a cookie, he listens intently. Arno tells the prince that since his goal has been achieved, he should return to the castle. Ferdinand throws a fit, begging to stay longer, but Arno shuts him down with a firm no. Carendia giggles at the sight of the pouting prince being scolded by the stern duke. Their conversation is interrupted as Rayleigh rushes into the room, calling for Lord Arno. Rayleigh presents a letter, informing Arno that it has arrived. Seeing the letter presented to her, Carendia looks bewildered and asks who it's from. Arno takes the letter from Rayleigh, as Ferdinand watches curiously. Rayleigh announces that the letter is from Count Guise, causing Carendia to recoil in shock. Later, holding a lantern, Carendia walks down a dark hall, certain that a letter from the Count can only mean bad news. She cautiously approaches the door to Arno's study. Inside, a worried Rayleigh stands before the door and asks Lord Arno about the contents of the letter. In his study, Arno reads a letter and explains that Count Guise is upset, claiming the dowry was insufficient. Rayleigh expresses his outrage, exclaiming that the amount provided was enough to live on for 3 years. He continues, relaying the Count's claim that the amount doesn't match the worth of the daughter he, quote, nurtured with great care. A sweating Rayleigh adds that the Count is also requesting business support. Tap. Rayleigh places the letter on the desk, as Arno sits in thoughtful silence. With eyes glowing a menacing red, Arno scoffs internally at the ridiculous notion that Carendia was nurtured with care. Prince Ferdinand recalls seeing Carendia, light as a feather and without a proper dress, and remembers hearing Count Guise lie that she was too frail to be seen in public. As Arno sits in cold fury, Carendia listens from outside the door, clenching her fist and thinking, this is unforgivable. She flashes back to the abuse she suffered, thinking her adoptive parents never once saw her as their daughter, let alone nurtured her with care. Seething with anger, she thinks how ridiculous their claim is, certain the generous dowry Arno provided has already been squandered. She imagines her adoptive family gleefully wasting the money and concludes that such despicable people should not receive any financial support. Peeking through the doorway, Carendia nervously asks Arno what he plans to do. Arno calmly instructs a worried Rayleigh to go ahead and prepare the funds. Her eyes wide with disbelief, Carendia cries out Lord Arno's name in protest. She bursts into the study, insisting that she will work to repay the amount herself. Standing before them, she passionately argues that her family has not given her even a single coin of the dowry. Arno looks up from the letter, calmly asking if she was eavesdropping on their conversation. Caught, Corendia stands in the middle of the room and apologizes for listening in. He looks at her and reminds her of what he told her before, not to underestimate his financial power. Corendia tries to protest, but can only manage a hesitant but. Dipping a quill in ink, Arno states that he will provide the money as severance pay and tells her there's no need for her to feel guilty. Rayleigh nervously objects, suggesting that calling it severance pay is perhaps a bit too harsh. Arno firmly places his hand on the letter, declaring the matter settled, as Corendia thinks that her entire life's work wouldn't be enough. She continues her thought, remembering that Lord Arnaud only married her as part of a contract. Gritting her teeth, she resolves not to let him be troubled any further by her former family. Suddenly, a man with red hair appears behind Corendia, whispering for her to stop being stubborn and rely on Arno as both the Duke and his butler stare in shock. Held by the stranger, a startled Corendia looks up and wonders who he is. The red-haired man smirks that Arno is too good for her, prompting an enraged Arno to rise from his chair and demand he stay away. A flash of blue energy erupts as Arno summons a glowing sword and swings it at the mysterious intruder. Arno now stands protectively in front of Corendia, his magic sword pointed directly at the red-haired man. The intruder smiles, unfazed, and remarks on the rather rough welcome he has received. Shielding Corendia with one arm, Arno holds his sword ready and angrily demands to know why he is there. Arno's eyes glow as he names the intruder Deathbringer, who merely smirks in response. With his glowing sword held steady, Arno repeats his demand for the intruder to explain his presence. Arno shouts the man's other name, Grim Reaper, as Corendia watches, stunned. She stares in disbelief, realizing the infamous Grim Reaper is standing right before her. The tense standoff between Arno and the Grim Reaper is frozen in a dramatic moment before the scene transitions. The Grim Reaper casually tells Arno not to look so scary, assuring him he isn't there to take Corendia's soul. Arno and Corendia remain on high alert, the Duke's glowing sword still pointed at the intruder. Arno lets out a frustrated yell, his patience clearly wearing thin. The Grim Reaper gestures dismissively, explaining that he sensed something interesting was happening, and simply came to watch. He glances at Corendia, musing that Arno actually married the soul's bride who could break the curse, prompting a bitter reply from the Duke. Arno glares at him, angrily stating that he hasn't heard of any such thing. With a sly grin, the Grim Reaper provocatively suggests that for all he knows, the bride could have been a man. Enraged by the taunt, Arno shouts at him as his sword flares with power, while the Grim Reaper simply laughs. Changing the subject, the Grim Reaper asks why the sword hasn't been pulled out yet, but Arno retorts that it's none of his business. The Grim Reaper's glowing yellow eyes narrow with intrigue as he insists that he is still curious. Surrounded by an illusion of red roses, he reveals that Arno lost someone precious to him. Corendia thinks about this precious person, recalling the story that the Duke was cursed 150 years ago after attempting suicide out of grief from the war. She looks on with sad understanding, realizing that whoever he lost must have been truly irreplaceable to him. Rayleigh looks on in confusion, seemingly unable to see the Grim Reaper as Arno stands guard over Corendia. Held tightly by Arno, a wide-eyed Corendia looks back in utter confusion. She looks from Rayleigh to the intruder, realizing with a start that the butler can't see the Grim Reaper. Arno keeps his glowing sword at the ready, shielding a worried Corendia who clings to his arm. With a menacing grin, the Grim Reaper tells Arno to make sure she pulls out the sword before she dies, then vanishes. The intruder disappears in a swirl of red particles, leaving Arno and Corendia to stare at the empty space as Rayleigh remains oblivious. 3 days later, the scene transitions with an image of sparkling red roses. Corendia waters roses in the sunlit garden of the estate. She lets out a heavy sigh, her mind clearly troubled by recent events. The small, ferret-like animal appears with a cheerful cry, and Corendia crouches down, happy to see her little friend. She apologizes to the creature, asking if it was bothered by her sighing. As the animal nuzzles her hand, she thinks to herself that she can't stop replaying the incident in her mind. Her thoughts turn to the Grim Reaper's words about the precious someone Arno lost. Tending to the roses, she muses that for the Duke to choose death, that person must have been incredibly special. A sudden, shocking thought crosses her mind, and she wonders if that person was the Duke's. Startled, she turns to find Arno standing behind her, remarking that something is about to bloom soon. She jumps in surprise, flustered as she asks how long he has been standing there, holding a single red rose. Arno calmly tells her he just arrived. Relieved, Corindia nervously accepts his answer, hoping he didn't overhear her thoughts. As they walk together, she timidly asks if he heard her monologue. Arno looks at her with concern, noting that she still seems a bit down. She recalls his earlier words, asking what he meant when he said something was about to bloom. Looking at her gently, he reveals, "I meant you," causing her to blush. He observes that something has seemed off about her ever since the Grim Reaper's visit. They walk in a moment of contemplative silence. Corindia voices her concern, asking if his contact with the Grim Reaper caused something to happen to him, despite the Reaper's assurances. She quickly and loudly insists that's not what's bothering her. Flustered, she stammers, unable to properly express her feelings. She bows her head in frustration, unable to find the right words. Internally, she struggles with wanting to ask about a fiancé, but fears he still longs to join his lost love. She questions if it's selfish to keep him bound to this world, just so she can stay by his side. Arno gently encourages her, asking her to tell him if something is troubling her. Touched, Corindia thinks about how he is always so worried about her. With renewed resolve, she thinks that she can't let things continue this way. Her hand moves with quiet determination as she makes a decision. Steeling herself, she looks at Arno and asks if she should pull out the sword right now. Arno is shocked by her question, and memories of their time together, including their contract, flash through his mind. His eyes widen as he wonders if she no longer wants him to be her husband. Corindia clarifies that she will do it, but only if that's what he truly desires. TSK. Arno clicks his tongue in frustration, clenching his fist at his side. Misinterpreting his frustration as agreement, she reaches out a hand with a pained look, declaring she will pull the sword out immediately. Sometime later, Arno sits alone in his study, letting out an exhausted sigh. He touches his cheek, reflecting on the frequent heart palpitations he's been experiencing lately. He wonders if it's an illness, while a flashback shows Prince Ferdinand cheekily suggesting they be less formal as a married couple. Arno considers this, a thoughtful and slightly troubled look on his face. Leaning back, he concedes that Ferdinand might be right about the distance between him and Corindia. A chibi illustration shows the formal distance, with Corindia calling him Duke and him calling her she, leaving him flustered. Musing on the distance, he glances around nervously as if making sure the Grim Reaper isn't listening in. He nods to himself, seemingly resolving to close that distance. Knock knock. As he nervously practices saying her name, Karen, he's startled by someone at the study door. Startled by the knock, Arno calls out, "Who's there?" as Calandria announces herself as Calandria from outside the study and asks for a moment of his time. Having entered the study, Calandria now stands before Arno, who remains seated at his desk. She bows deeply, apologizing for addressing him so familiarly earlier and explaining that she felt it was the right thing to do. Continuing, she mentions that since they're married, she also thought Prince Ferdinand's advice had merit. As Arno looks on with a slightly surprised expression, Arno looks down at his hand, offering to revert to their formal way of addressing each other if his familiar tone made her uncomfortable. Leaning across the desk, Arno quickly grabs her hand, earnestly insisting that he is not uncomfortable at all. A close-up reveals Arno's deeply flustered and blushing face as he struggles with his words. Calandria looks at him with innocent confusion, asking if that's really the case. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, Arno covers his face and promises they'll be able to call each other by name before the birth festival. As Calandria watches him, she thinks to herself how relieved she is. She continues her thought, admitting she was worried she had been too forward, despite the prince encouraging her. With a final thought, she realizes her worries were unfounded as she pictures Arno's adorable, flustered reaction. Beaming with a bright smile, she agrees, promising to also try calling him by name while he remains flustered at his desk. Changing the subject, Calandria asks if there will be a dance at the upcoming birth festival. Arno confirms there will be a dance and asks if she has any concerns about it. Looking anxious, she nervously begins to explain her situation. Calandria confesses she never learned how to dance, shocking Arno, who then grows intrigued by the mystery of her past. Standing up from his desk, Arno kindly offers to teach her how to dance himself. As he teaches her to dance, Arno praises her for picking it up quickly, wondering how she could have learned nothing at the Baron's household. He asks if she's truly never attended a social event, and she quietly confirms she hasn't. Arno gently presses further, asking her what the reason was. She simply replies that she doesn't know, leaving Arno to echo her words in confusion. Arno looks at her with a pensive expression, considering her puzzling answer. Standing in the dimly lit study, he asks if it's because she was an adopted daughter. With a shadowed and unsettlingly calm smile, Corendia simply replies, "I see." Arno's hand clenches into a tight fist as he realizes the reason for the lack of contact from the Baron is because she was adopted. A flood of painful memories and realizations hits him, from her lack of address to the mistreatment she must have endured. His eyes glow red with rage as he processes the cruelty she must have faced. Corendia regrets saying anything, admitting her birth family was a fallen marquee house and not something to be proud of. She then timidly asks if being an adopted daughter makes her unsuited to be his wife. Arno immediately and firmly reassures her that it's not true. Corendia looks up, her expression filled with relief and gratitude. Arno internally resolves to confront the Baron, but realizes he needs more information from Corendia, who is already hesitant to speak. He considers that the Baron's family will likely be at the birth festival, making a confrontation almost certain. Her expression hopeful, Corendia asks if he could teach her to dance again. Arno gives a simple, warm "ah" in agreement. They resume their dance lesson, a happy smile gracing Corendia's face. 1 week before the festival, Arno pushes a reluctant Prince Ferdinand toward a carriage, telling him to hurry back to the palace. Prince Ferdinand looks back fondly at Arno and Corendia standing together. After the prince's departure, the narration explains that the days passed quickly. Time was spent in preparation, filled with dance and etiquette practice. During an etiquette lesson, Corendia looks overwhelmed as a mustached butler corrects her at the dinner table. While packing, Corendia stops her ferret-like friend from jumping in a box, as Arno looks on from his study, deep in thought. Arno stands alone, holding a small red ring box and staring intently at the ring within. Finally, the day arrives, and a radiant Corendia in a yellow gown declares, "I'm off," as she prepares to leave with Arno and Rayleigh. Corendia laughs with pure joy, flanked by a smiling Arno and Rayleigh. Seated in the carriage, a happy Corendia waves from the window with Arno beside her. Rayleigh stands alone on the road, watching as their carriage drives away into the distance. During the journey, Corendia blissfully enjoys a sandwich, letting out a satisfied, "mmm." She cheerfully tells Arno that Rayleigh's sandwiches are, as always, the best. Arno notices her quiet change in mood and gently asks her what's wrong. Her thoughts return to the estate as she wonders aloud if Rayleigh ever feels lonely being there all by himself. Arno looks at her intently, remarking that she speaks as though she's intimately familiar with the feeling of loneliness. Startled by his observation, Corendia quickly reassures him that there's nothing for him to worry about. She then remembers that her little friend Rita is still at the mansion with Rayleigh, which brings her some comfort. With that thought, she convinces herself that everything will be fine back at the estate. Clenching the fabric of her dress, she lets out a bright, cheerful, "Yeah," as Arno watches her, a small smile playing on his lips. As he observes her radiant smile, he touches his own lips and wonders if he's smiling for no reason at all. Corendia comments on the beautiful weather as their carriage continues its journey through the lush countryside. Arno tells her they still have time before reaching the capital, encouraging her to rest if she feels tired. She smiles brightly, and he promises to wake her up when they arrive at their destination. Corendia drifts off to sleep, her head bobbing slightly. Arno watches her doze off, thinking to himself that she looks just as tired as he is. He worries that she's going to hit her head if she keeps nodding off like that. Pondering what he should do in this situation, he stands up from his seat. He gently guides her head to rest on his shoulder, a nervous but caring expression on his face. Thump. The carriage hits a bump in the road, jostling them. Corendia settles comfortably against him, sleeping peacefully on his shoulder. Arno looks down at her serene face, a tender and protective gaze in his eyes. As she sleeps peacefully on his shoulder, he looks out at the passing scenery and quietly wonders if this moment could go on forever. Corendia begins to stir, murmuring softly as she wakes up. "Wah!" She jolts awake with a start, realizing she's been leaning on Arno's shoulder. Embarrassed, she wonders how she ended up in that position while he watches with a gentle, sleepy smile. She looks out the window, her expression filled with wonder at the sights of the capital city. Their carriage rolls into a bustling town square filled with people and market stalls. Still flustered from waking up, Corendia looks out at the lively streets. Arno yawns and stretches, asking if they've arrived. Corendia notices the festival atmosphere, pointing out the happy family with balloons. Looking out the window, she sees a blonde-haired woman in a pink dress who seems to be looking their way. Huddled closer to Arno, she nervously remarks that she feels like a lot of people are staring at her. Arno calmly explains that the public's attention is likely due to the royal family's crest on their carriage. Corindia suddenly remembers that their carriage was provided by Prince Ferdinand. She recalls that His Highness also made their arrangements for the night and asks Arno about their lodging. Peeking out the carriage window, she asks where they will be staying. Arno calmly replies that they won't be staying in the city. He informs a surprised Corindia that they'll be staying at the royal villa. Shocked by the news, Corindia watches as they arrive at the grand royal villa, its opulent exterior on full display. Standing inside the lavishly decorated room, Corindia is completely overwhelmed, stating that the room is incredible. Arno nonchalantly comments that the accommodations are decent, considering Ferdinand handled them, while Corindia worries about breaking anything. As Arno walks toward the balcony doors, Corindia calls out in a panic, telling him not to leave her behind. She follows him out onto the balcony, her breath catching as she takes in the spectacular view. Awed by the scenery, Corindia declares that the place is beautiful. She notes that the villa's layout feels surprisingly similar to the Duke's estate. Leaning against the railing, Arno smiles faintly and remarks that it feels a bit nostalgic. His comment makes Corindia thoughtful as she looks at him. Her thoughts drift as she wonders why Lord Arnaud would have left the main Duke's estate to live in a secondary residence. A brown-haired butler appears, asking politely if he should take the luggage to the bedroom. Corindia happily agrees, thanking the butler for his help as he looks into the room from the doorway. The scene shifts to reveal a single, grand canopy bed with pink curtains, filling the luxurious bedroom. Corindia covers her mouth in shock, while Arno glares with furious intensity, hinting at the surprising implications of their shared room. Arno confronts the brown-haired butler, demanding to know the meaning of this arrangement. The butler trembles with fear under Arno's intense gaze. With eyes glowing red in fury, Arno seethes, barely able to contain his anger. The terrified butler stammers that, since they are husband and wife, he thought a shared bedroom was appropriate. "Excuse me?" Arno glares, clutching his shirt in disbelief and anger. Gritting his teeth, Arno curses that bastard Ferdinand for clearly enjoying himself at his expense. He furiously orders the butler to prepare another room immediately. Corindia watches from the doorway as Arno grabs the butler by his collar. The butler apologetically explains that all the other guest suites are currently occupied. He looks on in terror as Arno's grip tightens. Arno furiously demands the butler summon Ferdinand at once, while Corindia watches, thinking how distressed the servant looks. The tense standoff continues in the luxurious bedroom. Arno squeezes the butler's face, silencing his protests with an intimidating glare. Corindia cheerfully interrupts, suggesting they accept the room His Highness so kindly prepared for them. With a bright smile, she states that she doesn't mind sharing a room with Lord Arnaud. Arno looks at her in stunned silence, wondering if she truly understands the implications. She happily asks him to extend their gratitude to the prince, leaving the butler starstruck and thinking, "Oh, goddess." As the butler bows and leaves the room, Arno stands stiffly beside Corindia. Corindia turns to him and asks if something is wrong. Covering his blushing face, Arno can only stammer, unable to form a coherent sentence. She looks back at him with an innocent, questioning expression. Thump. His heart pounds in his chest from the unexpected turn of events. As she looks at him, he inwardly panics, wondering why his heart is beating so loudly. Corindia laughs, clarifying that she meant she would sleep on the sofa, so it's fine. As she walks toward the sofa, a flustered Arno watches her, and she again asks if something is wrong. He quickly turns away, insisting that it's nothing. Running a hand through his hair, a blushing Arno declares he will take the sofa as she can have the bed. Corindia firmly objects, looking shocked at the suggestion. She passionately argues that she can't let Lord Arnaud sleep on the sofa. Arno turns back, asking what kind of man would make a woman sleep on the sofa. They stare each other down, locked in a tense but awkward standoff. He thinks to himself that at this rate, they will never settle the argument. Corindia proposes a compromise. They sleep on opposite sides of the bed, as it's big enough not to disturb each other. She points to the bed, reiterating that with so much space, it shouldn't be an issue. Covering his face in embarrassment, Arno thinks that's not the point, and wonders if he's the only one feeling awkward. Corindia looks at him with a slight, innocent smile, genuinely confused by his reaction. Sighing in defeat, Arno reluctantly agrees to her plan. Later that night, Corendia says she'll hang her dress in the closet as she prepares for bed. Standing by her suitcase in a purple nightgown, she seems to have a sudden thought. She kneels down and begins unpacking her large suitcase. Wah! She cries out in surprise upon discovering Rita curled up and sleeping inside a smaller box. Arno, now in a dark robe, enters the room and asks what's going on. Corendia explains that Rita must have accidentally gotten packed with the rest of the luggage. In a flashback, she realizes she left her bag open and had to rush to pack when the carriage arrived early. Looking downcast, she apologizes for the mistake. Arno kneels beside her and calmly says what's done is done, telling her to have a servant find something for Rita to eat. As they look at the sleeping animal, she worries that Rayleigh might be concerned about her. With a gentle smile, she decides she'll deal with the dress after Rita wakes up. She gently strokes Rita, who remains curled up and fast asleep in the box. Grab. Arno suddenly takes her hand, startling her as she looks up at him. He pulls her to her feet, telling her to take something as he leads her toward the bed. Still holding her hand, he pulls her down to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. He presents her with a small, red velvet box, telling her that it's for her. Confused, she looks at the box and asks him what it is. As she opens it, she finds a beautiful ring nestled inside, wondering at the unexpected gift. Arno explains that the ring has been passed down through generations to the wives of the Duke's family. She immediately rejects the offer, pushing his hand away while insisting that she can't possibly accept it. With a look of genuine panic, she exclaims that the ring is far too precious for her. Overwhelmed by the gesture, she sits with her head down and hands clasped tightly. As Corendia remains distraught, Arno looks down at the ring with a somber and distant expression. He quietly explains that his younger brother, the one who was meant to inherit the family, would have given it to his partner. Surprised, she asks if he has a younger brother, and he clarifies that he had a twin. With sorrow in his glowing red eyes, Arno holds the box and states that his brother is gone now. Corendia covers her mouth in shock as Arno reveals it happened 50 years ago, the memory of a bloody battlefield flashing before them. A pained smile crosses his face as he confesses that his twin was killed right in front of him. A flashback begins, showing a young, brown-haired boy calling out to a young Arno in a sunlit garden. The young boy tells Arno to slow down, trying to catch up to him and his identical twin brother. Arno's twin brother turns to him and complains that he's walking too fast. Arno smiles brightly, apologizes, and holds out his hand to his twin. The young brown-haired boy asks if Rayleigh is there, and Arnold's twin happily confirms it while holding his brother's hand. The young Rayleigh declares his dream to become a great butler just like his father, the head butler of the Duke's family. Arno's twin says it feels like a game and eagerly pulls his brother along. Young Rayleigh cheerfully suggests they all play tag together in the garden. Arno's twin turns to him with concern, asking if he's okay since he skipped practice that day. The twin sheepishly admits that he was only pretending to be sick. He cheerfully confesses that unlike Arno, he is terrible at swordsmanship. A pink-haired woman appears, overhearing his confession and asking with a smile if he faked his illness. She looks at the boys with a knowing, slightly mischievous smile. The twin who feigns sickness quickly hides behind Arno, pleading for his brother to help him, announcing, "Here I come." The pink-haired woman begins to playfully chase the two boys. She asks which one of them she has as she grabs one, while a close-up shows the twins' identical yet distinct expressions. Laughing, she declares she'll catch them both, as they all run joyfully through the garden with young Rayleigh. A memory of the woman embracing the two boys fades, as the narration recalls how that seemingly endless happiness suddenly came to an end. The scene shifts to a desolate, rainy graveyard where two men stand before a tombstone. A closer view reveals a younger Arno in a military uniform, standing silently in the rain at the grave. Tears stream down his face as he thinks about how his parents believed in Arnaud's future and would be furious if he left the Knights. His twin, holding an umbrella, reassures him that it's fine, vowing to take responsibility for the family's affairs. The twin places a comforting hand on his brother's shoulder, trying to console him. The narration continues, explaining that after that day, he dedicated himself completely to sword training. A montage shows his swift rise through the ranks, from joining the Knights to serving as Prince Iswal's right-hand man and achieving countless victories. The scene shows Arno's twin reading a letter from his brother, who calls him his dear twin and only family. Reading the letter brings a smile to the twin's face, as he thinks that Arno always gave him something to look forward to. 7 years later, on a burning battlefield, a soldier resembling Arno fights fiercely as someone questions if it's him. The enemy celebrates the capture of the undefeated hero, Arnaud Christo, as a soldier informs a horrified young Prince Ferdinand that the enemy's morale is soaring. Prince Ferdinand desperately shouts to his soldiers not to be fooled, insisting the captured man isn't Arnaud. He screams for them to wait as enemy soldiers close in on the man they believe to be Arnaud. An enemy soldier stands over the captive with his bloody sword, asking in confusion, why? As he's stabbed through the chest, another enemy soldier wonders when Arnaud became their prisoner. On the fiery battlefield, a bloodied and desperate young Arnaud screams his brother's name. In a brutal flashback, his twin Arnaud is shown crucified and bleeding, thinking that he has been caught. An enemy commander on a platform explains that his men mistook Arnaud for Arnaud, a mistake that ultimately led to their current advantage. Arnaud strikes down an enemy from behind, declaring that the tables have now turned. A goated enemy leader smirks cruelly at the captured Arnaud. As Arnaud is struck across the face, the narration curses the tragic fate of the twins. Back in the present, Arnaud tells a stunned Corindia that he killed the enemy king that day. Clutching his head in agony, he cries out that Arnaud should have been the one to die, not him. As he grieves, Corindia listens silently, thinking how cruel that war 50 years ago must have been. A collage of happy family photos fills the screen, illustrating how the mansion is filled with memories of Arnaud. Corindia suddenly embraces the tormented Arnaud, telling him not to keep blaming himself. Her bare feet touch the floor as she holds him close. Cradling his face, she tells him that if he had died, she would never have come to the mansion. She explains that she would never have met Rayleigh, the prince, or even her beloved Rita. With a gentle smile, she calls his survival a miracle, and a tearful Arnaud looks back at her, moved by her words. Now composed, Corindia sits across from him on the bed and asks if he will put the ring on her. She smiles warmly and pleads with him to do it. He gently slides the ring onto her finger, vowing to himself that he will help her find what she seeks. Arnaud begins to formally state his relationship to Arnaud. Corindia joyfully interrupts, holding up her ringed hand and declaring herself Christ's bride. Overwhelmed and blushing, Arnaud can only think, please. Thump. He clutches his chest as his heart pounds once more. He thinks that just seeing her smile is enough to make his heart race. He grabs his robe, struggling to compose himself. Leaning forward, he wonders if this feeling is some kind of illness. Looking at Corindia, he feels an overwhelming emotion he can't contain. He thinks to himself that his chest tightens whenever he looks at her. Clenching his robe, he feels a desperate need to hurry and resolve something. Smack! Rita suddenly leaps into the air and hits him squarely in the face. He falls back onto the bed as a startled Corindia calls his name. Lying on the bed, he thinks, not again, as Corindia's voice is heard from outside the room scolding Rita. Kneeling by the bed, Corindia apologizes profusely for Rita's behavior. Arnaud sits up, revealing paw prints on his face and chest, looking utterly defeated. Corindia continues to lightly scold Rita for her outburst. Arnaud chuckles, dismissing the incident as nothing more than an animal's instinct. Corindia lovingly cuddles Rita, who licks her face in return. He watches them with a fond, gentle smile. In a cute chibi scene, Corindia lectures a confused Rita, telling her she can't attack everyone. Later that night, the two are seen sleeping on opposite sides of the large bed. Lying wide awake, Arnaud thinks he can't possibly sleep there, since they aren't a real couple, and decides to move to the sofa. He stops as he hears Corindia murmur, "Mother," in her sleep. He turns to look at her, his departure forgotten. He watches her sleep peacefully. He gazes at her, wondering if she ever thinks about her biological parents. Remembering how she always smiles despite her struggles, he gently strokes her hair. He continues to tenderly stroke her hair, thinking how much she has helped him. He vows to himself that now, it's his turn to help her. The scene shifts to a grand ball for the birth festival, where a brown-haired woman smiles while holding a cupcake. Now in a formal pink gown, the brown-haired woman feels the weight of everyone's attention on her. Her thoughts reveal she's ignoring the crowd, searching only for the hooded man she met in town Arnaud. A brown-haired woman in a pink dress clasps her hands, thinking excitedly that meeting him here is surely fate. She scans the grand ballroom, her expression falling as she wonders if he's not there. Her face fills with doubt as she thinks that it can't be true. Overhearing two men discussing Duke Christ's attendance, her hopes are renewed. She approaches the men with a charming smile, asking for more details about their conversation. After learning the Duke is attending with a woman, she eagerly asks if it's his bride. A man with auburn hair scoffs, suggesting that any woman with the Duke is probably just after his fortune. She lets out a light giggle, amused by the men's gossip. Thinking to herself, she muses that the Duke's wife must be greedy, realizing people are spreading rumors about Corindia. Her internal monologue continues, noting Corindia is unknown and unsupported in high society. She smirks, thinking she'll feel sorry for Corindia for marrying such an old man. Meanwhile, Corindia and Arno approach a grand set of doors as she thinks that the moment is finally here. She holds his arm, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. Picturing her sneering adoptive family, she braces herself for the high-ranking nobles waiting inside. With a determined glint in her glowing blue eyes, she resolves not to be scared. Clutching Arno's arm, she vows to act with confidence and dignity. Corindia takes a steadying breath, her expression resolute. Arno takes her hand, looking at her intently as he promises to protect her with his ring. He gently reassures her, promising that everything will be fine. Her gaze softens as she looks down at the ring on her finger, his hand holding hers. As he kneels before her, she looks down at him and offers a simple, heartfelt thank you. They walk forward together down the sparkling red carpet, ready to face the crowd. As an announcer declares the arrival of Duke Arno Cristo and Lady Corindia, Isabella's eyes glow with malice, eager for the drama to begin. Watching them descend the stairs, Isabella thinks gleefully that she can't wait to see how miserable Corindia will be. She lets out a confused, "Huh?" as she sees Corindia and Arno appearing confident and elegant together. Shocked guests murmur amongst themselves, surprised that the Duke isn't old and is actually quite handsome. Other guests admire Corindia's beauty, wondering which prominent family the unknown woman belongs to. Isabella stares in disbelief, her mind racing as she simply thinks, why? Her eyes burn with fury as she silently demands to know why Corindia is with him. Nearby, Count Guise and his wife also watch in shock, wondering what's going on. The Count angrily dismisses his wife's confusion, asking why it even matters. Looking flustered, the Count and his wife stare at the couple, wondering what is happening. A guest notes that the Duke doesn't seem to have aged at all, while Arno smiles confidently. Watching from the crowd, Count Guise clenches his fist, thinking this can't possibly be real. The guests speculate that the man can't be the real Duke, suggesting he's a grandson who inherited the title. Isabella overhears their theory and smirks, deciding that it makes perfect sense. Arno stands poised and regal, with his elderly butler standing watchfully in the background. Convinced by the rumors, Isabella smugly thinks there's no way Corindia is really married to him. A powerful voice rings out as a blond man in an ermine-trimmed cape calls out Arnaud's name. Corindia turns toward the voice, wondering who the man could be. The man is revealed to be the former emperor, Blatz Iswal, the famed ruler who brought peace to the nation. Arno and Corindia halt at the bottom of the stairs, coming face to face with the former emperor. The former emperor reaches out his hand in a grand gesture. He greets Arno boisterously as his friend, and Arno responds with a reserved, "It's been a while." The emperor playfully smacks Arno's back, teasing him for being so formal in front of a lady, as Corindia winces in sympathy. Gritting his teeth, Arno thinks to himself that the emperor is still as ridiculously strong as ever. The emperor, mentioning he heard the news from Ferdinand, urges Arno to introduce him, causing a nervous Corindia to wonder if he means her. Arno gently guides Corindia forward, presenting her to the former emperor and Prince Ferdinand. Standing proudly by her side, Arno formally introduces Corindia as his wife. Corindia takes a deep breath, reminding herself to carry herself with the dignity befitting the Duchess and the ring she wears. With Prince Ferdinand behind him, the former emperor, Blatz Iswal, offers a formal greeting. Smiling brightly, Corindia curtsies and introduces herself as Corindia Christ. The former emperor declares Corindia a brave young woman, worthy of being his dear friend's wife. Addressing the entire ballroom, Blatz Iswal grandly announces the arrival of the nation's hero, Arno Christ. He continues his speech, recounting how Arno, as his right-hand man, fought countless battles and achieved incredible feats. Looking over the gathered nobles, the former emperor proclaims that the hero's loyalty has never once faltered. From the crowd, Count Guise and his wife watch the proceedings with grim expressions. The emperor reveals that to prevent another bloodbath, Arno drank a potion said to grant immortality. He concludes that Arno dedicated himself to being the empire's guardian, leaving the crowd stunned. Guests murmur in shock, wondering if the Duke sacrificed himself, as a tense Arno and Corendia stand in the middle of it all. The former emperor recalls the hero's difficult and lonely journey, picturing a younger, battle-worn Arno. Corendia thinks to herself that she can't possibly admit her marriage is only a contract. Blatz loudly declares that the effects of immortality may not last forever. He assures the crowd that the royal family deeply values the hero's loyalty and the dedication of his supportive wife. With a fierce glare, Blatz warns everyone to never forget that the Duke and Duchess have the royal family's full support, terrifying Count Guise and his wife. Beaming, the former emperor calls for a warm round of applause for the noble couple. As the crowd applauds, Corendia looks on, wondering what they would think if they knew the truth. Watching from the sidelines, a flushed and furious Isabella thinks that she was the one who was supposed to marry the Duke. She glares at the couple, seething that all the admiring eyes should have been on her instead. Trembling with rage, Isabella vows she won't give up and will reclaim her place as his bride no matter what. As music fills the air, an orchestra plays for the mingling guests in the grand ballroom. Later, the former emperor sits and talks with Arno and Corendia, with Prince Ferdinand standing nearby. Blatz lets out a hearty laugh, exclaiming that it was a great speech. Prince Ferdinand watches his grandfather with concern, questioning his decision to say such things. Ferdinand asks what he will do when nobles start coming after him for the immortality potion he mentioned. Unconcerned, Blatz tells him that if they want the potion, they can search for it themselves. He adds with a confident smirk that they will never find it, no matter how long they look. In a cute moment, Blatz laughs jovially while Ferdinand looks stressed, and Arno remains impassive. Corendia watches them, thinking to herself that His Highness seems to be having a fun time. Arno gets her attention, calling out her name as she turns to look at him. He notes that she must be thirsty, and kindly offers to get her something to drink. In a chibi moment, Corendia thinks how thoughtful he is while Ferdinand looks on. Prince Ferdinand leans in with a playful grin, asking when the two of them started calling each other by name. MMPH. The former emperor shoves Ferdinand's face aside, telling him to move. Pushing his grandson out of the way, Blatz asks Corendia to confirm her name. Startled but composed, Corendia enthusiastically confirms that yes, her name is Corendia. On a quiet, starlit balcony, the former emperor asks Corendia if she would mind talking with him for a bit. Alone for a moment, Corendia touches her cheek, wondering what he could possibly want to talk about. Blatz approaches her from behind, explaining that he heard about her relationship with Arnaud from Ferdinand. He turns to her and asks directly if it is true that she can see the sword that stabbed Arnaud. With unwavering blue eyes, Corendia looks at him and calmly confirms that she can. The former emperor nods, recalling how the late emperor always called Arnaud his right hand as a flashback shows their younger days. He continues, saying he always worried about his friend even when they couldn't meet, before they sit down to talk further. Suddenly, the former emperor is seized by a violent coughing fit. Corendia rushes to his side in alarm, asking if he is all right. She gasps in horror as he pulls his hand away from his mouth, revealing it to be covered in blood. With blood trickling from his lips, Blatz admits that despite his jokes, his time is running out. Corendia stares at him in utter shock, speechless at the sudden grim revelation. Overlooking the city lights, he confides that only his doctor knows of his illness, as he doesn't want to bring everyone down. He looks at her sincerely, explaining that his failing health is why he so badly wanted to meet his old friend and his new wife today. On a balcony under a starry sky, a blonde-haired emperor reflects that his comrades from the battlefield have all passed on. He thinks to himself that he has no regrets, having entrusted the country to Ferdinand's father, who inherited the throne. Corendia watches him, thinking of the name Arnoa. The narration recalls how the late emperor worried about leaving Arnaud alone, showing a flashback of a man holding a child in a graveyard. Resolved, Corendia thinks that she won't let her husband be alone, as the scene returns to the emperor on the balcony. She touches her ringed finger, vowing to stand by him until the day he wields his sword once more. Approaching the emperor on the balcony, she thinks it is because of the promise they made to each other. A close-up shows the emperor looking at her, his expression softening with emotion. He stands tall and resolute on the balcony against the night sky. The scene shifts back to the party, where Arnaud stands alone by a table laden with wine bottles. The brown-haired woman Isabella approaches Arnaud and asks if he remembers her, claiming they made eye contact earlier. In a chibi thought bubble, a flustered Arnaud denies remembering any such thing. Arno turns to leave, telling an astonished Isabella that his wife is waiting for him. She stares in open-mouthed shock as he walks away. She calls out after him, introducing herself as Corendia's stepsister. Grabbing his arm, Isabella stops him from leaving. Arno looks down at her hand on his arm and asks coldly, "So what?" With tears welling in her eyes, Isabella pleads with the Duke, telling him that Corendia is deceiving him. She claims Corendia has always been skilled at gaining sympathy, flashing back to a memory of a young Corendia being comforted by maids. Isabella tearfully insists that she was the one who was supposed to marry into the Duke's family. She accuses Corendia of forcing her way into the marriage on the wedding day to steal the Duke's inheritance. With a crazed expression, she argues that the royal letter specified the Count's second daughter was to marry. Arno stands over the distraught Isabella. He tells her that if she's going to lie, she should at least make it believable, leaving her speechless. Meanwhile, Corendia searches the crowded ballroom, wondering where Arno has gone. A voice greets her, and she turns to see her adoptive father, Count Guise, causing her to freeze in shock and terror. He smiles, commenting that she looks like she's doing well. Corendia glares, telling him not to speak as if she was miserable before. The Count smirks, insinuating that the settlement money sent by the Duke was her idea. She accuses him of trying to extort money from the Duke, her expression filled with disdain. Corendia watches as her adoptive father walks away with her adoptive mother on his arm. Her adoptive mother approaches her, tearfully begging Corendia to ask the Duke to help them. Clasping her hands, the woman desperately asks if family isn't supposed to support one another. Corendia recalls her painful past, being hit for mistakes, ignored while crying, fed scraps, and left shivering in a cold attic. Snatching her hand away, she furiously declares she has never once considered them her family. Her adoptive father lunges to strike her, but Arno suddenly appears, catching her wrist and pulling her safely behind him. Grabbing the Count's arm, Arno glares furiously and asks what he thinks he's doing to his wife. Before the shocked party guests, Arno stands protectively in front of Corendia, confronting her abusive adoptive father. Corendia looks up at her husband's back, surprised as she thinks his name. As the Count chokes in his grasp, Arno reminds him of the letter warning him to stay away from Corendia, while she thinks about the severance payment. The adoptive mother tries to make excuses as the Count stammers, but their words are cut off. Prince Ferdinand intervenes, telling them to stop and not cause a scene during his grandfather's birthday celebration. Ferdinand smiles charmingly at the Count, reminding him that the imperial family supports the Duke and his wife. The flustered Count can only stammer in response to the prince's clear warning. Arno announces that there's nothing more to discuss and leads Corendia away from the scene. As they walk away, the Count watches them, his face a mask of stunned fury. He seethes with rage, thinking that his kindness has been repaid with betrayal. Safely away from the crowd, Corendia thanks both Arno and Prince Ferdinand for stepping in. The prince cheerfully dismisses her thanks, remarking that protecting one's wife is simply a husband's duty. Arno shoots a sharp, glowing-eyed glare at the prince, who lets out a startled yelp. Corendia chuckles, apologizing for being rude as Prince Ferdinand and Arno glower at each other in chibi form. Her expression softens as she thinks to herself that she's been fighting on her own for so long. In the grand ballroom, she laughs, while the prince and Arno continue their tense exchange. As guests mingle, Prince Ferdinand announces it's time for the dance, and turns to ask Corendia to join him. Corendia looks away, flustered, telling the prince not to say such silly things. Arno steps forward with a confident smirk, declaring that he will be the one dancing with her. Startled, Corendia remembers that the first dance is always meant for someone special. She then sees the prince's casual posture and dismisses the thought, figuring it probably doesn't mean anything. Now standing with Arno, Corendia wonders why she's suddenly feeling so nervous. He leads her onto the floor, and they begin to dance, spinning gracefully among the other couples. The other party guests look on in surprise and admiration at the dancing Duke and Duchess. While dancing, Corendia notices the atmosphere feels different and thinks that Arno seems changed tonight. He grins playfully, asking if she's mesmerized by his charm. Spin. As he twirls her, a flustered Corendia insists she was just focusing on the dance steps. The dance concludes, and they face Prince Ferdinand, who has been watching them. The prince smiles brightly, announcing that it's finally his turn to dance with her. Corendia stands ready, a calm expression on her face. Now dancing with the prince, she questions if he's certain he wants to dance with a married woman. He smiles, dismissing her concern by saying it's fine, since he doesn't have a set partner. As they dance, he leans in and sincerely thanks her, calling her by name. The prince begins to recall the past, explaining that Arnaud was once distant, as a flashback shows a young Ferdinand at a villa. He remembers how a young Arnaud would simply shut himself in his room and sleep, ignoring everyone. The flashback continues with his grandfather, the late emperor, explaining the nature of Arnaud's curse to a young Ferdinand. The young prince looks devastated, thinking how much it hurt to learn of his friend's suffering. He recalls vowing to become Arnaud's friend, shown clinging to the older boy's leg. Back in the present, Carindia addresses the prince formally as they continue their dance. Ferdinand continues his story, laughing as he recalls how Arnaud always brushed him off no matter what he did. He looks fondly at Carindia and tells her to just look at how Arnaud is now. Glancing over her shoulder, the prince notes with amusement that Arnaud is intensely jealous, watching them from the side. As dark energy emanates from him, a furious Arnaud questions if Ferdinand's observation is true. Carindia wonders what's happening as she continues to dance with the prince. She muses that while she was flustered before, perhaps her husband just seems different tonight. In a cute chibi moment, Prince Ferdinand observes a pensive Carindia. He smiles warmly, telling her to take all the time she needs to figure things out. Carindia slips away from the ballroom, seeking a quiet moment alone by a pair of large doors. Tap, tap. Thinking she's found a place to rest, she sits down in an empty room. Suddenly, a man identified as the emperor, Ferdinand's father, rushes past her to embrace a shocked Arnaud, exclaiming his relief that he's safe. Carindia quietly exits the room, now wondering if her pet Rita is doing okay. As she walks down a quiet hall, she reassures herself that she made sure Rita had plenty of food before she left. She sits by a large red trunk, relieved that her pet seems to have behaved while she was away. Bang! A sudden noise startles her, as a voice remarks that it's been a while. In the darkened doorway, Isabella appears with glowing purple eyes and a sinister smile, calling Carindia's name. A promotional page for the series features a dark-haired character wielding a sword. Isabella stands over a seated Carindia, coolly stating that it's been a while. Carindia looks up, her expression turning to one of wary shock as she recognizes her stepsister. With a menacing grin, Isabella demands to know what Carindia is doing in the room and accuses her of following her. Inside the open trunk, Rita the ferret-like animal is sleeping peacefully. The two women face each other in the dimly lit room, the tension palpable. Carindia stands and calmly asks her stepsister if she needs something from her. With a sinister smile, Isabella tells a wary Carindia not to be paranoid, claiming she only wanted to visit her adorable little sister. Carindia scoffs at the word sister, angrily recalling a memory of Isabella looming over her and calling her a toy. Isabella observes Carindia's appearance, sarcastically noting that she seems to be doing quite well for herself. She recognizes Carindia's expensive dress, identifying it as a new design from Pearl, exclusive to the upper class. Stepping aggressively towards Carindia, Isabella demands to know how she convinced the Duke to buy it for her. Isabella grabs Carindia's face, accusing her of using her annoyingly perfect looks to seduce the Duke. Carindia stands her ground as Isabella looks at her with disdain. Pushing back, Carindia reminds a stunned Isabella that she was the one who refused to marry the Duke. Carindia taunts her, asking if she's upset about the dress she'd been dreaming of, causing Isabella to yell, "Shut up!" In a fit of rage, Isabella violently shoves Carindia backward. Carindia cries out in shock as she stumbles, a golden ring flying from her hand. The precious ring clatters across the ornate red carpet. Isabella picks up the ring, mockingly commenting on how pitiful it is that it fell apart so easily. With a sneer, she declares that someone as weak as Carindia could never be the Duke's wife. Holding the ring up to the light, she criticizes Carindia for having no proper education. Isabella gazes at the ring, proclaiming that she is far more suited for the role of the Duke's wife. As Isabella gloats, Carindia looks down in defeat, beginning to wonder if her stepsister is right. She recalls Arnaud's words about the ring's significance, and his painful wish that he had died instead of his brother. Fueled by the memory, Carindia's expression hardens as she declares that she knows how important the ring is to Arnaud. She lunges towards Isabella, furiously demanding the ring back. Grabbing Isabella's wrist, Carindia struggles for the ring as her stepsister cries out in pain. Carindia desperately pleads for the precious ring back, but Isabella just calls her stubborn. Isabella violently shoves Carindia away, breaking her grip. Ugh! Carindia cries out as she is thrown to the hard floor. Isabella glares down with fury and contempt at the fallen Carindia. On the floor, Corendia looks up defiantly as Isabella calls her a parasite for clinging to others. Bark, Rita the ferret suddenly leaps forward, barking fiercely at a startled Isabella. Isabella sneers, annoyed that the animal's interruption makes her look like the villain in the situation. Rita stands protectively by Corendia's side, growling at Isabella. Isabella sighs, telling a defeated Corendia that she'll return the ring out of pity. With a cruel grin, she holds the ring near an open window and adds a challenge, if you can find it. As Isabella throws the ring out the window, Corendia whispers, "Lies," in disbelief. Corendia watches in horror as her stepsister's hand retreats from the open window. She lets out a pained ugh, struggling to her feet as she stares at the window in shock. Isabella pats a kneeling Corendia on the shoulder, wishing her good luck with a malicious smile. Corendia and Rita watch helplessly as Isabella walks away from the scene. Corendia quickly scrambles towards the window, with Rita right behind her. She looks out into the dark garden below with a horrified expression as a door slams shut behind her. Safely out of sight, Isabella reveals she still has the ring, smugly thinking Corendia will never find it. She walks away down a dark hall, confident that the Duke will eventually abandon Corendia. In the dark, rainy garden, Corendia and Rita frantically search through the rose bushes for the lost ring. On her hands and knees, Corendia panics, realizing the ring is nowhere to be found. She crawls along the stone path, determined to find it no matter what. Back at the party, Arno looks out a window, observing that it has started to rain. He approaches Prince Ferdinand and asks for Corendia's whereabouts. A surprised Prince Ferdinand explains she went to check on Rita, while Arno, sensing trouble, stares into his drink with a dark expression.